Hello, hello. So we're just gonna wait one more minute for other folks to join in, and then we'll get started very, very soon. As we're waiting, I just wanted to let everyone know about our soup fundraiser. You should see a poster on the screen right now. We do have a fundraiser happening right now where we're selling our curried squash soup in support of United Way Greater Toronto and YRFN. So if you're interested in purchasing a soup to support us, they're $15, and you can place your order by emailing Christina at so Christina l@yrfn.ca by November 12th. Okay. And I've heard that this soup is fantastic.
Okay. There are different flavors or just one flavor?
Just one flavor. So just the curried squash soup.
Oh, okay. Because I saw several dishes in the picture.
Yeah, I know that is a bit confusing. That's fair.
Okay.
But it should be something like this, that middle one. Yeah. All right. So just conscious of, making sure we respect people's time, we can get started. And then as people join us, they can catch up. Okay. So let me just get set up here. And let's see. Alrighty. So yeah, thank you everyone for joining us today for this workshop on preserving your greens. My name is Jess. My pronouns are she and they, and I'm the Urban Agriculture Coordinator at York Region Food Network. And we're in for a treat today. So we have our very own Chantal McCallum facilitating a workshop on how to preserve your greens. So that includes your leafy greens and also your herbs. But before we get into the workshop, let's just take a quick second and go over some housekeeping for the event. So we're recording the workshop so that we can put it on our YouTube channel. So just for your own privacy and security, we've turned off cameras and microphones other than our own. So if you're not obviously comfortable with having your video on, feel free to turn that off. And we got another person joining. If you have any questions during the presentation, please feel free to type them out in the chat box, and we will have a Q&A period at the end to address some of those questions. And if anyone has any access needs, so if I'm speaking too quietly, or if we need to slow down, if the video volume is too quiet, please let me know in the chat box, and I'll do my best to accommodate any of that. And so the workshop today is being brought to you as part of our Compost Learning Hub programming. So the hub is a place where community members get to learn about various styles of composting through our demonstration garden. And we finally secured a physical space. We've been saying this for a long time, that we're looking for a space, but we finally got one. So there will be more news coming out shortly about that. But at that place, at the hub, we'll be offering educational workshops like this one today on various topics. So they'll range from composting, growing gardens, seed saving, water conservation, and waste reduction. So for now, we're having these virtually, but we're really looking forward to having in-person workshops in the spring, fingers crossed. And this initiative will just help to provide opportunities for folks to connect with the land and use compost as a way to reduce our impact on the environment. So if you want to look for more information on the project and our winter workshop lineup, you can check out our website and also sign up for the email list. And both of those links I'll put in the chat very shortly. And then, you know, we're connecting virtually right now, obviously due to COVID, but I just always encourage fellow settlers to let's just take a moment and reflect on the history of the land that you're currently tuning in from. And I do this always with the acknowledgement of the intertwining legacies of settler colonialism and the transatlantic slave trade. For myself, I'm currently tuning in on Williams Treaty territory and traditionally cared for by the Wendat, the Haudenosaunee, and the Anishinaabe peoples. We have our neighbors, the Chippewas of Georgina Island First Nation, as our closest Indigenous community, and they're just about an hour and 15 minutes northeast of us. And I always say this, but in the same way that learning a person's name is a necessary first step in developing that relationship with them, land acknowledgements can be a vital first step in learning about who lived and continues to live on this land. But first steps always need to be followed by many more steps and actually many more actions. You know, we can acknowledge the land and still harm it. We can acknowledge Indigenous people and still have no connection to them. So how can we do better? You know, some of the questions that I always ask myself and encourage everyone else to consider are, you know, what does it mean to be a treaty person as part of the Williams Treaty territory? And what are our principles and our responsibilities in relation to each other as human beings, and also to the land that we are currently on, and the land that sustains us. So I just welcome you to brainstorm a bit and even share in the comments if you have any resources or responses. If you're outside of York Region, I encourage you to share the traditional territory information for the land that you're currently on as a step in better understanding our role as guests on this land. You know, now when we talk about reducing food waste, thinking about our impact on the environment, we're talking about land and how it gives to us and how we care for it. So as we get into the content of this workshop of reducing our food waste, let's just continue to investigate and bring to the forefront these questions. And let me introduce you now to Chantal, our Community Cooks Coordinator. Chantal's love of growing and preparing food is aligned beautifully with her role at York Region Food Network. Her ability to view food preparation from perspective of self-care, ease, and fun is reflected in her work with community organizations through food skills programs and her weekly commitment to meal production. Chantal's experience began as a child growing up on a small-scale farm. She learned to raise animals and grow vegetables with her father, and learned how to preserve the garden harvests with her mother. Health and wellness have been the professions that have most inspired Chantal over the years, and before working with York Region Food Network, she coordinated a student nutrition program in a York Region public school. In her personal life, Chantal loves to cook, garden, and go on regular hikes while foraging for wild edible plants and mushrooms. So a big thank you to Chantal for putting this workshop together. We have her pre-recorded presentation, and then Chantal's in the building. She's just in the kitchen taking care of meal preparation, but she'll be joining us live for the Q&A session after the video is finished. We do have a worksheet that will go along with the presentation, and I'll include that in the chat in a few minutes. So please feel free to open that up and follow along if you'd like, or you can review it after the workshop. Okay, so I'm just gonna get that video queued up and then feel free to ask any questions if you have them. Okay, and if I could just ask you to give me a thumbs up if the audio is okay for you and the video is okay for you.
Hello, my name is Chantal McCallum, Community Cooks Coordinator at York Region Food Network. I'd like to welcome you today to Blanching greens and preserving herbs. This is what we're doing today. And I want to thank you for taking time out of your life to be here. Thank you, Jessica. Thank you, Marissa, for inviting me to do this once again. This is always a lot of fun for me to share how I do my preserving. And it's going to be a lot of fun. So be prepared. Here we go. The first question that comes to mind is, why would we focus on blanching greens? Why would we bother with preserving those herbs? Well, here's the thing. Here we are, the month of November. The bounty has grown. There might be a lot of it. Sometimes we have our own gardens where we're growing those leafy greens, and they're very hardy. So they've been surviving into the month of November. They also get sweeter. They also get sweeter because of the colder temperature, which is also a very cool thing. The other thing is the bounty from our local farms and in our farmers markets, in our grocery stores. All of this abundance is there, and you think, should I do something with this? Can I take this and put this into my freezer? Well, how am I going to do that? And so today we're going to talk about blanching, because this abundance is with us. Also, you might have some of those items in your refrigerator, and we love to reduce food waste, don't we, at York Region Food Network? And so if those things are in your refrigerator, you have greens that are sticking around, they're starting to go bad in the back of the fridge, then you need to go do something with them. And this is a really great opportunity to do this with blanching. So we're going to talk about blanching of those leafy greens once again, and then preserving those herbs and using our freezer to do that. If you don't have a lot of freezer space, I promise you there's a way for you to put things in your freezer in a way that doesn't take up a lot of space. And so I'll tell you about that as well. Little tips that will come along the way, things that I've learned over time. So now let's talk about why blanching. Blanching is important to preserve color, texture, and flavor. Now, have you ever been in a situation where you have some frozen vegetables and you think, I'm just going to toss this in the freezer? And maybe you don't know what's going to happen to those vegetables when they come out of their freezer and be used in a stew or a soup. Well, when they do, and you put them in to a soup or stew, those vegetables, if they haven't been blanched, they tend to they're mushy. They don't taste very good either. And so that texture, they don't have a beautiful color either. And you think to yourself, well, I'm never going to do this again. Well, there's a step that you missed. We just need to do a little bit of blanching. And blanching, what it means is you're going to be submerging these vegetables or leafy greens in a pot of hot water for a specific amount of time. And I'll talk about that later as well, in terms of, because we're talking about leafy greens today. So I'm going to talk about other vegetables that you can blanch, not specifically, but you'll have a resource so you know how much time it needs to be in the water, because every vegetable has their own time. But for leafy greens today, leafy greens are going to be in the water for a couple of minutes. And I'm going to show you step by step how to blanch those leafy greens. All right, are we ready? Because it's time. It's time for us to do step by step. All right, here we are. First things first. First step, you will have a handout that you can follow along the way. So the first step is to wash the leafy greens and to make sure you have a pot of water boiling on the stove. So right over there is my pot. It is boiling, ready to go. And it doesn't matter, I mean, it does matter what size of pot you use. If it's a tiny pot, you're not going to be able to submerge the greens easily. This is a nice medium-sized pot. You don't have to go too large. Really, this is a perfect size. I'm going to come back. And so now that you have your leafy greens, you've washed them, they're ready to go. I have Swiss chard here. Beautiful Swiss chard. This is actually from my garden. Still thriving. Look at how beautiful it is, even at this time. Love that. I forget about it, and then I remember I need to go cultivate it as we get more advanced into the season, into November. And then I also have some kale. So I want to demonstrate how to blanch kale and Swiss chard. So then the next thing you need to do is you want to remove these tough stems. Now, the Swiss chard stems can be eaten. And I'm just going to break them off and put them aside. Swiss chard stems do not freeze well. And so instead of blanching them along with the leafy greens, I'm going to keep them aside. You can chop these and use them in soups or stews or stir fries. And that's what I do with that. I would chop them up, put them in my refrigerator, and know that I'm going to add them to something. For kale, this is a little bit different. You're not going to keep the stems. These stems are not edible for humans. They're chewy, they're fibrous, they're very, very difficult to chew. So we're not going to keep these. They're going to go in the compost or in our green bin. And same thing, we're just going to grab the top and pull. This stem here, that's okay to keep. It's very thin and it's edible, that part. Okay, so I have kale and I have Swiss chard ready to go. Now the next thing, step 3, is to blanch those leafy greens because your water is boiling. But before you do that, you must make sure that you have step 4 ready to go. And what that means is you need a bowl of cold water. Now this can be tap water and it can be ice water. And what I've done here is I've added some ice. Now, if I didn't do this, I would make sure that the cold water was running at the sink ready to go when I blanched my greens. I do prefer using a bowl. This is a tip that I think is really important, is making sure that you're organized. If you blanch your vegetables and they're ready to go and you're not ready to submerge them into cold water, they're going to over blanch. So the cold water or the ice water, honestly, we've done some in the office at YRFN where we're using tap water, nice cold tap water, and that's enough to really cool down the greens so that they stop cooking. Ice water just gives it a little bigger shock. So if you have some ice cubes that you can throw in here, that's perfect. If you don't, it's okay to use cold water from the tap as well. So now we're on to step 3. And I'm going to move this bowl out of the way for a moment and bring you closer to the action. Now the water is boiling. We have our Swiss chard ready to go here. As soon as you submerge the leafy greens into the hot water, you will need to set a timer for 2 minutes. All leafy greens need 2 minutes, and that's it. Anything. Spinach, 2 minutes. Kale, 2 minutes. Collard greens, 2 minutes. Any greens, that's what you need. So I'm going to submerge these in right now and have my tongs ready. I'm going to set the timer immediately as soon as I submerge them in. And here we go. Put them in the hot water. Make sure that water is bubbling a little bit. 2 minutes. Okay. Now, because you already have your bowl of cold water, you're going to be ready to put these leafy greens in. Two minutes is up. Here comes the leafy greens into this bowl of ice water. They will stay in the ice water for 2 minutes. Oh, one went back in the pot. Another 2 minutes. While they're sitting in the ice water, looking ever so green and bright, by the way. I'm not sure if you can see. Looking like their color has been beautifully preserved. We still see some beautiful red of that Swiss chard. Gorgeous. So while this 2 minutes is going by, you need to think about what bowl you need to put this in. The next step is to put them into, I have another bowl here, another stainless steel bowl. Any bowl will do. You'll be taking out these greens and putting them into this empty bowl. And then we are going to squeeze I'm going to squeeze, you're going to squeeze when you are doing this. Squeeze the leafy greens of whatever water is there as much as you possibly can. Now the Swiss chard has been in the ice water for 2 minutes. Grab the Swiss chard, put it in your empty bowl. And begin to squeeze out. Now I have, oh yes, the water is changing color. All of these, this is nutrient rich liquid here. I know some of you are thinking, can I save that? Yes, you can. I have a container in my freezer. Here's a tip. Whenever you're doing this, container in a freezer that you can add this juice to would go beautifully in a vegetable stock, a soup you're making, so that we can save the nutrients. It's now a very small ball of Swiss chard. And I squeezed as much water as I can out of this. I mean, there's a tad, there's just a little wee bit. This is good. If you don't do this step, what will happen is your Swiss chard will be one big block of ice in its Ziploc bag or container, which is okay if you plan on using all of it at once in one recipe. But if you want to be able to have small pieces of greens available, ready to go, you must squeeze out the water so that it isn't a block of ice in the bag. So now that I've done this, I'm going to remove the bowl, save this for my vegetable stock. Step 6, here we are. Swiss chard has been squeezed. All of the moisture has been taken out of it. And now it's time to chop the greens. You want to chop the greens into pieces. Again, I'd like you to start thinking about, what am I going to use this in? If you are going to be using this in a soup, in a stew, in a casserole, and your pieces are already chopped up in advance, nice and easy for you. Yes, I've made the mistake of freezing things whole, and then I have to wait for it to thaw, or it goes into the soup in large pieces and it's just not ready to go. So this will make your life easier. This is a tip right here. I like to make life easier. And then I have a Ziploc bag. What I've done here is I've added Swiss chard and the date onto this. Sometimes I use Tupperware containers as well, also thinking of ways in which to reduce waste in our home. In this instance, it seemed appropriate to use a Ziploc to show you how you can see everything clearly here. Now, this isn't a lot of Swiss chard. However, this might be perfect for even just start thinking about, again, like I said, where are you going to use this? What if you're doing scrambled eggs or an omelet and you want to put in some leafy greens? This is a really great quantity. It's perfect. If you want more, if you want to add more to this, then you're thinking, oh, I'm going to use this in a soup or stew, then you may want to double that quantity here. And then you're only going to add these greens at the very end of the cooking time for your soup or stew. So now I will flatten out, because I like to flatten out what I'm freezing. Of course, there's not a lot in here. If there was more, there'd be more to flatten out. Then I remove the air as much as possible. And then this is ready to go. Now, when I put this in the freezer, I will likely fold it this way, and I stand it up in a tray, in a container, whatever you have that could potentially hold this. Saves a lot of space if you are able to stand it up. And this is yet another tip to making your life easier in the freezer. And if you can keep your vegetables in one area in your freezer, you'll know to find them, because, you know, haven't you all forgotten that you have these things at some point in time in your freezer, and then you're thinking, I really should go look and see what's going on in there. So those are really important points to make around that. So now that we've done Swiss chard, kale would be the same, by the way. You would blanch this the same way that I just did. You would go through all of the steps and chop it up or squeeze it, chop it up, and then put it in a Ziploc ready to go when you need it. Now I'm going to talk about kale for a moment before I finish off, because oftentimes, I don't even blanch kale. That's the only exception when it comes to greens for me. And that's because I will use kale differently, and I'll explain what that means. So here's a bag of frozen kale that it's just a chunk of kale that's in here. And I like freezing it like this for the purposes of putting in smoothies, where you can take a piece of it. See how it easily crunches up? It almost crunches up like glass pieces. It's cool. I like doing this. It breaks up into little pieces. And then as I would like to throw into a smoothie, I'll grab, this is a tiny piece. I might use more than that, but it's ready to go. This is perfect. If I blanch this and put it into a smoothie, not so much. I like it this way. And you'll see many, many folks talking about freezing kale just like this. Wash and freeze it and put it in a container. Once it's frozen, you can break it up into pieces. And if you want to use it in stews and soups, then blanch it. One of the things that will happen if you freeze it this way and put it into a soup, it tends to come out a little bit slimy. It can. So that's why blanching is so important as well, because of the potential for this slimy texture to develop in whatever you're putting it in. And that concludes our blanching today. We will have the chance to have discussion and question and answer period about any other blanching questions that you may have. Okay, in conclusion with our blanching today, and because we only did leafy greens, I made sure that you would have, as part of your handouts, blanching times. So there's a list of vegetables on the table that you will receive, and it gives you all the times in which it must be in the water before submerging in cold water or ice water. This is a really fabulous resource that I use all of the time. There's no way we can remember all of the times, so this will be a great resource for you if you would like to blanch other vegetables. All right, so now we're going to talk about herbs. All right, here we go. Now it's time to move on to preserving herbs. Now, why would we want to do this? Again, same sort of thing as blanching those leafy greens or the vegetables that we have access to right now from our Ontario farms. This is a great time to be able to do that. Into the month of November, you'll see that there are some hardy herbs that are still thriving. And if that's in your garden or with our Ontario farms, you'll find parsley, you'll find thyme, dill, also mint, rosemary, sage. These are herbs that are all available for us to harvest and to put together and prepare so that we can enjoy them for those winter months. And so that's a very good reason to go ahead and do that. The other reason is if you do have, I had a bunch of parsley in my refrigerator and I realized, oh, I just cultivated that from the garden and then I forgot that it was there. And so I want to make sure that I do something with that and preserve that parsley. We're going to be using a lot of parsley today and some dill as those two main herbs. I might sneak in another one in there. We'll see. We'll see. I sort of, for a moment here, I thought, I think I had a third one that I wanted to do. But we'll see what happens as we move along today. I'm going to show you 5 different ways to preserve herbs. So let's move on to the first way. And what you'll find is you may find there'll be one way that you just love. And that's going to be the way that you're going to choose to use all of the time. Or you might find that there's a couple ways. By no means do you ever need to do all 5 ways, but there are options for you to decide what is best. So what you see here are many things that I will be using to freeze herbs. The first thing we're going to talk about is freezing bare herbs. you will need a tray. I have a baking tray here. I've placed parchment paper on it. And I have some dill. Loved having dill in the freezer. So what you do here is you don't need to destem the dill. This would work the same for rosemary, thyme, bay leaves, sage. You would lay them down on your sheet, baking sheet here, or tray. Now I do overlap them slightly and they will still freeze. So it's all right to do that since I have so many. They will not clump together and they will freeze so that you can take them off the tray and package them and put them in your freezer. There we go. Now off to the freezer. And I'm back with frozen dill. This is ready now to be packaged in a Tupperware container or in a Ziploc bag. I've labeled it dill and the date. We'll go ahead and add these dill stems, squeeze out as much air, hold, and seal. Ready to go into the freezer. Next, we're going to freeze herbs in water. We need an ice cube tray for this one. And we're going to do parsley today. Now, there's a couple of ways that you can do this. This is a tip that you can decide what works best for you. You can freeze whole leaves in the tray, just like that. And you would be placing that herb in the tray here. Cilantro, this works well for cilantro, works well for parsley, works well for mint. I'm just thinking, do we ever need a mojito maybe in the winter months? Why not? Even though it's cold, mint would be really good with that mojito. Now I can stuff the ice cube tray with a lot of parsley pieces. The tip that I want to share with you is that if you plan on, again, we're thinking, what are we going to use this for? If you freeze herbs in ice cube trays, how will you use this? What will be the application? For a whole leaf like this, it's a large leaf, this one. I think to myself, well, if I want to use this in, let's say I'd like to add some parsley to soup and I just want a single serving of parsley, then I'm going to chop this parsley. And instead of putting it as whole leaves, you can take the time to chop up the parsley in smaller size that you would put in a dish. Then toss that parsley in, single serving right there. And you can do that through the entire ice cube tray or mix it up. Have some mint, have some cilantro. Then you're going to pour water on top of your parsley bits, just like that, as you would to fill the ice cube tray with water, and freeze it. Once it's frozen, I have my frozen cubes in this container, and you'll see. Now I froze some whole leaves as well as chopped, and I did a combination of cilantro and parsley. I have some cilantro here and I have some parsley here. When I was a child, I would use ice cubes to cool down my soups. This is what I'm thinking as one way in which to use these fresh herbs. And look at how beautiful and green they are. They really do have preserved, it has preserved its color, and it's really quite gorgeous. Really easy single serve things. The other thing I was just thinking too is that if you're freezing your parsley and you've got some cilantro and you want to add those to dishes, you can pop in that ice cube into that curry that you're making, or again, stew or soup. Just like that. It will melt and then you'll end up with the wonderful greens there to flavor your soup or dish. The next method I'd like to show you is freezing herbs in oil. So I'm going to need my food processor for this. You can also use a blender for this purpose as well. So I've set up my food processor, and in this step, we will be freezing herbs in oil. I have parsley here, seems to be the herb of choice. You're going to add in a cup or more, it depends how many cubes you want. You can do this with basil too. You can also do this with thyme. You can put in only the leaves. We'll keep those stems for stock making. I put those in a freezer bag or a container, and at a later date, I will use that to make stock. All right, so now that you have a cup of foliage, parsley, you will then be adding the oil to this and blending it up, and I will show you what the texture of this will look like. Pour in a 1/4 cup of oil. And I'm going to turn this on. Now you can tell from this mixture that it needs a little more blending. And what I'm going to do is add a little bit more oil. So a 1/4 cup to a little bit more, and you'll need to gauge that as you're mixing it. What you want to see happen is the parsley breaking up into small bits. Add another bit of oil. And here we go again. Let's take a look at this mixture. This is perfect. It's in small bits. You'll see here that the parsley has broken down into small bits in the oil. It's perfect. You'll do the same for any other herb. This is what you want to have as texture. Now it's ready to pour in to the ice cube trays. I have a silicone ice cube tray here. I love these. You can easily remove the cubes without too much of a hassle. I find with regular ice cube trays, the plastic one that we used earlier, it's harder to pop it out. It also stains the inside. Sometimes it does that too. So as long as you know that, you know you have options. So here we go. I'm going to bring down the screen so you can see me pouring this in. I like to make large cubes. Time for the freezer. I'm back with frozen parsley in oil. So I'm going to pop these out to show you. I have a cube ready to go. At this point in time, I'm going to put this cube in the Ziploc bag that I've labeled parsley, again with the date, and put it back into the freezer for later use. One other tip for you, as we're looking at these whole cubes, you can actually add whole leaves with oil. And what would happen there is you would put a whole leaf of parsley or basil into the ice cube tray and cover it with oil. This is blended and ready to go. If you're making a pesto, this is fantastic. You can pull out 2 cubes and put that in your food processor with the other ingredients. The only difference is you would allow this to thaw slightly so that you could actually blend the oil, but your oil is already here to make a pesto and it's so perfect. You can also cut this cube in half, make smaller pieces, and that can go into a frying pan if you're ready to saute something and you'd like to add a little parsley flavor. The oil is already there. It's perfect. It's easy. Now for our 4th method, rolled herbs. What that means is you will need a Ziploc bag. some parsley leaves. In this case, that's what we're going to use. You can also do this with sage. You can do this with bay leaves. Take pieces of the herbs minus the stems. Again, save those stems for your vegetable stock or a juicer too, right? You can juice those. You're going to take all of your parsley stems, as much as you'd like to freeze, put them in the Ziploc bag loosely. Then start to, I'm going to bring down the screen so you can see. You just want to start rolling the Ziploc bag. So you're tightly winding all of the herbs inside there, squeezing out the air, sealing your Ziploc bag, and securing this. Somewhere on here, you would have written this as parsley. That's an important one. And then you will tie either twine or elastic around. I also didn't put a lot of parsley in here for the purposes of a demonstration. This would potentially be much larger. And then you can freeze this rolled herb mixture. Very cool. Nice and easy and fast. Let me show you what it looks like after it's been frozen. Unrolling, this is also parsley. As you need it, you can reach in. Look at how beautiful the parsley looks. You can reach in and grab some parsley from your bag and chop that up and put that into your soups and stews, casseroles, omelets. Now on to the fifth method. This one is probably very familiar, I'm going to say, because there are many ways that you can dry herbs. And quite commonly, this is how I quite commonly will dry herbs. I bundle them up, put an elastic around them or a piece of twine, secure them, and hang them on a hook in my kitchen. I find my basement is very good. It's got a cool, dry space. There isn't a lot of humidity because we have a dehumidifier, and I hang my herbs in the basement. This is one way to do it. The other way that you can do this is have drying racks, and these are mesh racks where you can lay down stems of herbs. Within 2 to 3 days, you will have dry parsley in this case, but you can do that, of course, with thyme. You can do that with bay leaves. You can do that with sage. The drying rack will help. It's mesh, so the air is flowing through that drying rack easily, and it will dry out the herbs. Once they're dry, then you can crunch them up and put them in a sealed container, a jar of sorts that you have for now the enjoyment of those dry herbs during that winter season. The other way that you can also dry herbs is using a dehydrator. If that's something you have, it's very easy. As you put the herbs on the sheets inside the dehydrator, and you actually dehydrate it at a low temperature, and that will dry the herbs as well. That takes a little bit more time, and not all of us have a dehydrator. The next option is using your oven at 170 degrees Fahrenheit. Yes, you will place, in this case, you'll want to remove the herbs from the stems. So you'll take those off, keep your stems. You'll place the herbs on a tray like this, and you'll loosely put them on the tray. Fill the tray, put it in the oven at 170 degrees Fahrenheit. Keep a close eye. You want to avoid the herbs from browning. They will start to crisp up. Once they are crisped up, it might be 30 to 90 minutes. It depends on the herb that you're drying. And that's going to be an experiential opportunity for you to determine how much time you'll need for parsley, how much time you would need for dill, how much time you would need for mint, oregano. So many, many different herbs can be put in the oven this way, and you can load up your oven full of different herbs to dry. Here's some dill that I dried in the oven. And once you put it in a Ziploc bag like this, you can just crunch them up nicely. You can hear how dry this dill is. And this will go into a jar with a lid, ready to go. So those are the ways in which you can preserve herbs, those 5 ways, many different options for you to choose from. I warned you, you'd have lots and lots of options. And now you get to decide which way is more suitable for you, which serves you best in your life. And I really wish you a lot of fun in doing this, whether you're blanching, whether you're preserving herbs, whether you're doing both. And there are really some fabulous ways in which that we can really enjoy the fruits of this beautiful harvest that we have available at this time of the year, and that we can enjoy throughout our winter season, because it's winter, it's going to be winter, I know, and we will want to remember the fruits of our labor and all of this wonderful bounty that comes to us during this time of the year. We will have a chance to have a Q&A session so that you can ask your questions. If anything else has popped up during this recording, that will be the opportunity for you to ask those questions. I thank you for being here, and I look forward to meeting many of you during our Q&A session. Thank you.
All right, awesome. So another big thank you to Chantal for that awesome workshop. Yeah, I know that probably herbs in the fridge are the #1 thing that go bad for me, because we always buy so much and then only need a little bit. So I think that's fantastic to be able to learn different ways to preserve those herbs. And then that way you don't have to buy a lot next time either, right? So we're going to go into our question and answer session now. We've got Chantal right here. She's just going to join us. And then we do have a question right here on the chat.
Oh, fantastic. Hello. Okay. Welcome, everybody.
Yeah. So one of the first questions was from Rochelle. So if we are pressed for time or have no easy access to a stove to blanch, what is the next best alternative? Can we puree fresh raw greens in a blender, then freeze immediately? Will the nutrients remain intact? Thanks kindly for your expert advice.
Thank you. That's a really good question. Let me see. I get the press for time option as well, for sure, with a question like that. And then if you don't have access to equipment. So if you're pressed for time, you would do like we do at YRFN. We throw things into a bag and freeze it. And then later when we want to use those items, sometimes they're just not, remember the reasons why we blanch is to preserve flavor, texture, color. And so that's pretty critical. But with greens, you can get away with just putting them in a bag, chop them up into pieces if you want, put them in the bag and freeze them, just like I did for the kale. So you can definitely skip the blanching steps. The only thing that will be different will be the texture, especially. But if you're throwing them in a stew, in a soup, in a casserole, it really doesn't matter. It's if you want to keep the integrity of the green and have it maybe as a side dish, it will be slimy in texture, so it won't be great. So that would be the only way that I would skip the step of blanching and would work beautifully for greens. It just won't work well for other vegetables like broccoli and cauliflower. And no, those things just don't have beautiful texture. If you just put them in fresh, you must blanch those ones. You can also use, I was just thinking, maybe a microwave too. Like if you have access to a microwave and that's the easiest thing and you just want to nuke them a little bit, then that could work too. But again, I'm not sure about that. Like in terms of timing, that would be something I'd have to look into. But if that's something you need, let me know. Did I answer that question in every way possible? Okay, good. Thank you. Thank you, Rashad. Okay.
And then Wen asks, how long can the blanched leaves keep in the freezer?
They can keep Okay, you know how you forget things in the freezer,
Mhm.
even a year, because what happens to me is they're there, but then I forget about them. So, I mean, ideally 6 to 8 months is your ideal time period. Sometimes though, I've gone up to a year and still been able to use them. Some of the nutrient value will be less because you've gone that long. But if you do find them in the freezer, just use them because that, again, like I said, it does happen. You forget about them.
All right.
Okay.
And then Lillian. So
Mushrooms.
my mom asks,
Lillian.
is there a way to preserve mushrooms? And I'll add so that she can make delicious food for Jessica.
Yeah, of course. It's all about that. I love it. Let's see. There is a way to preserve mushrooms. What do I do? You can dehydrate them and turn them in, and then later on, of course, add water to them to bring them back to life. So that's one way. The other thing that I've done is I've just sauteed mushrooms and then frozen them in little packages, which is beautiful. And it still maintains their integrity. They still have that same texture. It doesn't actually change. So that'll work, Lillian. That'll work really well. Yeah.
Nice.
Okay. And question answered. That's a good thumbs up.
Perfect.
Fantastic.
If anyone has any other questions,
Mhm.
feel free to put in the chat. I have a question.
Do you have a
actually.
question, Jessica?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So I know you mentioned basil real quick.
Yeah.
But I also think, like, I know basil really, like wilts easily and all of that. So like
it's
can
high
you-
maintenance herb. It's a high maintenance
Yeah.
herb. It gets really upset about. So basil doesn't like cold, right? Jessica and I were talking about this, how as soon as it starts to get colder, basil dies in your garden. That's it, it's gone. And so you can't, I was just thinking about if you freeze basil, it will turn brown and ugly. And so the best way to freeze basil is to, just like the cubes, right? The parsley, instead use basil and then preserve them in oil. So that's definitely one of the ways. And then the next way is you can actually blanch basil, just like you do the greens, not for very long though. Like we're talking 30 seconds. You dip them into hot water for 30 seconds, throw them in the ice bath right away, and then you can chop them up into pieces and then freeze them into sort of the same concept, the same way. That's really the only way basil, because you can't, like dill, you can freeze whole, right? Just like I demonstrated, you can do sage and thyme, and all those can just be frozen individually in a bag, but you can't do that with basil just because it's so gentle and
it's the
it's
diva.
high maintenance. It's the diva. It's the diva of herbs. That's true. That's true. I love it. Yeah, definitely. So great question, Jessica, for asking that. But we all would have needed to preserve our basil perhaps a little bit earlier, and mine died before I got to it. It happens. But there wasn't much of it because as the season goes on, I find like it gets smaller. Even when I cultivate it, it knows the season's coming to an end and it's not going to give you any more basil. Cool stuff. Is there anything, what did you learn from this recording? Like, what did you learn? If you have any other questions, please let me know what those are. And what did you learn? What do you need to know? If there's anything else that you need to know while I'm here, please let me know. I mean, there's all kinds of online resources to guide you for sure. I grew up on a small scale farm with parents who my father did all the gardening and growing of seeds and gardening. And then my mother did all the preserving. So since I've been a child, this has been part of my life. And I feel very comfortable with the whole blanching experience. We blanched and froze everything so that we would have great harvest to enjoy during the winter months. So I get this. I love doing this. If I had more space in my freezer, I would do more of it. And I do what I can. I do what I can throughout the year. It's difficult to find. I find it's difficult to find greens in our grocery stores in the wintertime. I mean, other than spinach, that's a very common, and thank goodness we still have access to that. But if there's any specific greens you love, it's not something you'll find easily. There's probably like Whole Foods and other places that might have those, but that's been my experience too.
Yep. I
see there's something else there, Jessica.
Yeah, Rochelle says, are food saver vacuum sealing gadgets and gizmos worth the investment?
They are. I have one and then I forget that I have it. They are really helpful because they remove all the oxygen from that bag, right? So it's even better because if it's really nice and vacuum sealed and there's no chance there's any oxygen in there, it doesn't, frost will collect inside those bags. So having a vacuum sealer just prevents that from happening. So it's a really great, they're not costly. I mean, other than buying the plastic for it, but you can also use Ziploc bags. So you don't necessarily have to buy those rolls of plastic for the vacuum sealers. Bye, Rachel. Thank you for reminding me that I have one of those, that I need to use it. It's in my cupboard. It's in my cupboard on the main floor too. As long as it's there, I can remember to use it, but you just reminded me. So thanks for that. It's definitely worth the investment. I think it is. Definitely. It keeps things fresher longer. You could definitely go a year in the freezer and it would still be great.
Yeah.
Yes. With the vacuum sealer. Fabulous question. Since we were talking about that earlier, does anyone want to just let me know what they learned today? Because I think that's so valuable in the learnings. And if there's something else you'd like to know more of, just as we move forward, if there's anything that would be valuable for you for some of those other workshops, right? Jess?
Absolutely. Especially, I think, if there's anything else that you think you'd like to learn to preserve, because today was a focus on greens and herbs, but are there other, vegetables or foods that you're really, really interested in future workshops? Just to help us sort of get direction on what people are interested in.
Right.
Yeah, I know while you guys are thinking about that, we at home, I just pulled out some squash that I had cut and, put in the freezer and then forgot. And then it got all freezer burnt and everything, and so I guess obviously it's use that in time, and remember what you have, which was a great tip that Chantal was talking about. But I'd love to learn about other ways to preserve some of those things so that it doesn't go to waste. We were so sad about our squash. So
I know, and we have so much of it in the office, so you could start over, but you do need to remember that it's in your freezer. Exactly. I think there's a specific time of the year where I do a freezer check, like what do I have in here, and it's usually in the, I was just thinking, hang on a minute, what is it? So usually in April, around that time, I start looking through my inventory, my freezer inventory, and this is when I start, because it's just before we really start getting into more of our produce coming, our Ontario produce being available again. So this is when I start cleaning out the freezer. This is when we do it here at WireFend. If anything, we're more efficient here than I am in my own kitchen, because we like to make sure that we use all of the produce that we've preserved. So we have lots of squash in there right now.
Yeah, we
Yeah,
really do.
We definitely do.
Alrighty. Well, I'm seeing some good suggestions. Yeah.
Amazing.
So definitely I'll write these down and be sure to, try and get some workshops in the future with, food safety. That's a great one. And then how to deal with oil when cleaning up, all of that. Fantastic.
Amazing.
All right. But just looking at the time, it's 2:01. So I just want to respect everyone's time. So just wanted to say a big thank you to Chantal. That was fantastic.
You're welcome.
It's always great to learn from you and all the tips that you have. And thank you everyone for joining us. Yeah, if you have any questions,
Jessica and Marissa.
Yeah,
for putting this together.
Yeah, it's so great to be able to learn from each other. But yeah, if you have any questions, feel free to send an email, but I'll be sending out a follow-up email with that worksheet included that I already put into the chat at the beginning. And then just some follow-up links and resources and that kind of thing. Okay, so feel free to send me any messages or emails if you have further questions for myself or Chantal. All right. No. Okay.
Okay, it's Jessica's time to highlight her.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you everyone
Thank
for
you
joining
so
us.
much.
Yeah. Have
Thank
a
you.
good day.